Welcome to another edition of Market Impact Insights, your podcast source for business leadership perspectives to help your business grow. Hear from experts in marketing, sales, business strategy, and more, with practical advice for business success. Make sure you won't miss the latest episodes by visiting marketimpactnow.com. Now, here's your host, Dan Albaum.
Welcome back, everyone, to another incredible episode of Market Impact Insights. And the philosophy of our podcast is that in business, it's all about making a positive impact every day. And as part of making a positive impact, it's no mystery that focusing on the customer is a key factor in establishing long-term competitive advantage. And as author Kevin Sturtz has pointed out, it's critical to know what your customers want most and what your company does best, and then focus on where those two meet. But in the world of product and solutions development, sometimes getting to that intersection can create tension. Trying to find the balance between fully satisfying everything the customer wants and the need to make disciplined choices when financial and people resources aren't unlimited. We're going to explore how to navigate through this today with an expert in product development and business leadership, John Traynor. John has an extensive leadership background in technology. Currently, he is vice president and general manager at TensorIoT. He leads the creation of products and solutions that simplify the way enterprises incorporate equipment and IoT edge devices to acquire data and subsequently transform that data into very actionable insights that improve business operations. Other leadership roles John has had: he was chief executive at Freepoint Technologies, where he's responsible for global growth, financing, the product portfolio, and business strategy. John was also chief operating officer at C Labs Corporation, where again, he had very broad responsibilities over sales, marketing, product management, and the whole solutions portfolio. John has also been a senior leader at B Square Corporation, leading product development and solution development. He was also a vice president of business products at Palm, later acquired by HP. And prior to that, John spent 16 years at, a company I think you've heard of, Microsoft, including leadership roles in the mobile and embedded devices group. So John has this extensive perspective across a number of different global companies, which will be perfect for the conversation. John has also lived in a number of different countries. He's had a real global perspective everywhere from New Zealand to Ireland to Canada and then here in the US. And he's also an accomplished author. He's contributed in terms of a new book on industrial automation that is being released by Vogel Business Media. And he's also written multiple articles for technology publications, currently focusing on industrial IoT and Industry 4.0. So with that as an introduction, John, welcome to Market Impact Insights.
Oh, thanks very much, Dan. It's great to be here. I enjoy the podcast and looking forward to our discussion today.
So, John, you've spent your entire career in technology, both in some startup emerging companies, but also for large global brands. Curious, what has fueled your passion to take that path, and how have you seen technology innovation change how product organizations have evolved over time?
Yeah, you really have to go back a long way to understand my start in technology. When I was a young teenager, and this is the late 1970s, the junior high school I was at had a Wang 2200 computer, one terminal, one optical card reader, one printer, and one 8-inch floppy drive, a basic language interpreter, and 8K of RAM, although now that I say that, it might have only been 4K of RAM. But nevertheless, I was really hooked. I suddenly saw that, even as a teenager, it was possible to create new value in software, to solve problems in interesting ways. and to make things easier for people. So I just started solving problems. It started with alphabetizing class lists at the school, and then it moved on to building inventory control systems for small businesses and report writing and all sorts of different things. And with each step, that ability to help ease a burden for others, to make things simpler, to make things more enjoyable, that's what got me excited about that. And when I look at all of the roles that I've had, so much of it has been about, is there a way to make things simpler for somebody else? Sometimes that's by bringing a product to market. Sometimes that's for marshaling the resources and making them available to teams of people so they could be successful. But I've had the privilege to work in a variety of different roles, and there's always something that is related to technology. There's lots of things I probably couldn't do because if it's not technology, it's not something that lights a fire for me particularly. But if it's about helping people and making things better, then I get very, very excited about that. And over time, I would say yes, there's been this long arc of technology that the technology we have today is a far cry from what was available in the 70s and 80s as I was growing up. But there's always new ways to find uses for technology to apply that to different areas, and to see, is there just another way we can help make something easier for somebody? Is there a problem that somebody has today that we can solve, or is there a way to bring something to market to perhaps meet a need that people didn't even know they had, but to really sort of solve a problem in a new and unique way?
Right. And as the tools and the systems have evolved, that certainly has got to reshape and reframe how teams and strategic planning works in terms of setting expectations over speed of delivery, right? Just the rate of having to enhance and evolve, right, what you do deliver to help solve those problems.
That's true. And actually, one of the things that I think is interesting is that has perhaps both some positive benefits, of course, but also sometimes some downsides. The degree to which we can quickly communicate with one another and collaborate on things certainly can make our problem solving as a collective group much better. But sometimes it gets people away from being able to make decisions on their own. People start to be actually afraid to make a decision by themselves because they think they need to check in with everybody
Yeah.
else. If I think back to, say, a century ago, if somebody started on a long voyage to go trade with somebody in a far off land, perhaps their voyage had been sponsored by somebody else who was paying for the boat and the crew and everything else,
Yes.
and they desired a particular commodity. Well, if you got to this faraway land and that commodity or thing wasn't available, you couldn't send them an email. You
Yeah.
couldn't hop on a quick Slack conversation and say, hey, what should I get instead? You really had to make your own decision. And I think sometimes we've lost some of that, the desire or the willingness or the ability to make decisions independently. So, I always encourage people to, like, it is great to check in with others. Certainly two heads are better than one in many cases, but there's also times where we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we have to make decisions, by ourselves. And I think, some of the things that we might talk about today is that some people struggle with being able
Yeah.
to make decisions and reduce the sort of the set of things that they have to deal with. And that's something I've certainly learned myself over these past few decades.
Yeah, accountability and ownership is something that really doesn't change, and maybe now more important than ever in the craziness of the environment that we're dealing with and the disruption right now. So obviously, one of the aspects of leadership, great leadership, is decisiveness and being able to help and make informed decisions. And I want to explore a little bit more with you, John. What were some of the early influences for you in developing your leadership approach that obviously you've been able to execute at across a number of successful organizations?
Yeah, well, I would certainly first have to credit my parents, and certainly, my father most clearly, in as much as that he was so willing to share his knowledge and wisdom. I can remember many conversations at the dinner table, many nights where he would just talk about what he had encountered day to day managing teams, and I'd be able to ask questions. And my mother, God rest her soul, she had a great gift for asking very disarming questions that really forced me to find simpler ways to convey ideas. And that was especially true as I got older and the more we spoke about technology, which was certainly something that my mother was less familiar with. And so, that ability to sort of understand that there's a dynamic of teams. It's just, not all about what your
Hmm.
ideas are. And that whatever ideas you have to be able to convey them in a very straightforward and simple way. And I'm sure I've made many mistakes, but hopefully when there's been success, it's because I've been able to help a team or an organization understand in fairly straightforward and simple terms, what is it we're trying to get done here? What do we want to do? What really is important? Um, and I think, especially to enable people to make their own decisions, is to give people the heuristics or the rule of thumb to say, okay, well, when I don't know anything else, what is at least the acid test, the question or set of questions I can ask
Hmm.
myself to know whether or not something that's going to be pursued here is aligned with what the team and the leader wants to do. Because if people can do that independently, that's great. That's less work for me as a leader, or for the team, because people can work together, they can work individually, and they can keep moving things ahead without always having to check in. In fact, I think one of the things as a leader you want to do is work yourself out of a job, because you want to create a self-managed and self-sustaining team that knows how to do all the things that you would want them to be able to do.
Yeah, it's a true empowerment, I think, is what you're talking about there.
Yes, absolutely. The notion that people don't always have to check in with the leader, and that people can make their own decisions, but should feel good about doing that as well, and know what sphere of influence they're responsible for, and really understand that. One of the things my father taught me was this notion of discretion, is understanding what are the things that you can do, even if it's something that's not been covered before, or you haven't discussed it or talked about it before, you don't have clear direction on it, but do you do you feel empowered? Do you actually take that upon yourself and understand what your sphere of influence is, so you feel comfortable knowing what you can and can't do by yourself, whether that's a promise to a teammate or to a customer.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true for any leader, including at the very top of the organization. And John, you've had the opportunity to do something that many of us may never do in our careers, and that's serve as a CEO. What were some of the biggest challenges, and what have you taken in the way of lessons from the experience you did have being a CEO?
Yeah, very good. Well, the first thing, Dan, is I would challenge what you just said. I think everyone, and somebody taught this to me early in my career, everyone always has the opportunity to be CEO of themselves.
That's
You know,
that is true.
yes.
You're looking at an interesting way there.
Yes, I mean, everyone is responsible for their own, actions. Somebody once explained to me that as you are able to respond, you can decide what you want to do in any particular station. There are consequences to your decisions, but you are in charge of yourself, and so always be the CEO of yourself. I think though, when you talk about a larger team or an organization. Being able to communicate what one wants to do is a big challenge. And I think that the three things that I've always tried to do, and I could take away from my experience, running a company, is you need to have very clear vision. To get people pointed in the right direction. It's got to be clear. Hey, why are we all coming to work today? What are we trying to get done? You do need to have the right people, and that isn't to say that I would ever divide the world into good people and bad people, but you want to have people in the right roles, and so you, you have to look at individuals' gifts and talents and really align those with the tasks they're trying to do. That's not to say there's a certain type of person for this task or that task, but people need to have the skills or the background or the training, or just the aptitude or desire for a particular type of work. And then I guess I'd say the third thing you have to take away from being a CEO is at the end of the day, you're the one person responsible for keeping the business afloat. Some people say it's lonely at the top. I'm not sure that's necessarily true. And typically for CEOs in a large enough organization, there's always a board of directors that you report to. So instead of having one boss, you might have 5, 6, 10 people that you report to. But at the end of the day, the board doesn't fire themselves when things don't work right. The board
No.
fires the CEO, and so making sure that you are keeping the business afloat is really critically important. So clear vision, right people in the right roles, and keeping the cash coming in the door.
Yeah, great advice. And shifting over what we were talking about at the top of the podcast, where this whole tension or dilemma potentially around customer focus, just thinking about that for a minute, we hear all the time that being a customer focused company is what can separate winning from losing in highly competitive markets. And you've obviously had to deal with this for a long time in many different organizations. What do you feel have been the most important ingredients when you were ensuring and creating and building a very customer focused culture?
Yeah, I think the one thing to keep in mind is that just because you think you know the customer or what the customer wants, that may not be true. So I hear some people saying, "Oh, I'm very customer focused because the customer needs this and this and this, and we have to deliver this and this in the product or do this thing." And sometimes just saying, "How do you know that?" exposes the fact that perhaps we don't have any real insight here. Maybe we just have opinion. The sample size of n equals 1. I think that's something that can get lost a lot. Customer focused doesn't mean just spending all your time thinking about the customer. It has to be making sure you're seeking to understand, that you're actually going out and gathering data, that you're most importantly empathizing with the customer, so you understand the problem they might want to solve from their particular perspective. I've often realized after the fact that I had some knowledge that perhaps a customer, didn't. And it was just that knowledge gap that was causing a challenge in being able to, understand something that I thought, well, how can there be a business here? How can this be a problem that a customer wants to solve? This seems like an easy thing. But, if you don't understand that from the customer's perspective, they don't know that a piece of technology is available to do that, or they don't know how to assemble that solution for themselves, or they don't even have the tools to make it work in their particular environment, well, you have a situation where you might have something great to bring to market, but you don't really understand the customer. Maybe you're belittling the customer's problem, but you're going to try and sell it to them because you're customer focused. I think it's important to really step back and start to understand customers, and also keep in mind that customers are individuals. You can make generalizations about segments of the market in particular regions, but that doesn't mean that every customer is the same, or that you can treat all customers the same. So I think seeking to understand is a great first step in being a truly customer focused organization.
And so let's assume a company is doing all the right things in terms of seeking that understanding and confirming and really truly being able to get that customer input and sense of the needs. But knowing that might be a really long list of things. In fact, it often is a really long list of things. So back what we were talking about earlier of this potential dilemma or the tension, which is companies always have to make tough prioritization choices because resources are never unlimited. And you've spoken before about the importance of being able to say no. What's that all about?
Yeah, I think one of the big things I've learned is you have to be able to say no. Um, and that might mean no with options, and we can talk a little bit about that. But at a certain point, you have to be able to say no. When I was doing my MBA in Toronto, one of the things that I learned that's stuck with me, which was a quote from Peter Drucker, was that the most important decisions managers face are abandonment decisions. What are you not going to do, so you can do it other ways? Arno Penzias, the scientist who was responsible for discovering cosmic microwave background radiation, had a lot of interesting things to say about the problem of sometimes smart people who are interested in lots of things. And he would talk about people saying, yeah, you can be interested in that, you can be interested in this other thing. And he said personally he was interested in a great number of things, but really the important thing was to be able to focus and say, this is what I'm not going to work on. Here's a research project that might have been interesting to him, but he was not going to work on it. He said a lot of smart people just can't decide what they're not going to work on. They can't say no, and so learning to say no is important. And I think a way to turn that around is to really understand that in order to ensure your success, you have to decide, what not to do. What have you decided not to do in order to ensure your success is incredibly important.
Yeah, and it just sometimes culturally in organizations that really aim to please, sometimes it just seems to run against the grain in terms of just the inclination to want to deliver everything. And so have you found there were specific tools or processes that kind of helped maybe in organizations you've been in where that was a struggle, kind of helped get over the hump to where saying no, making those right choices just seemed a little bit easier?
Well, I think you just have to stick at it and realize that it's so important to be able to do that. I do remember an executive who used to talk about, the tyranny of or, being told that we have to do, this or that. And his retort was, I want to do this and that. I want to do them both. I want to do them all. And I think it's fine to have great aspirations to be able to do a number of things. Perhaps one trick I've learned in that situation is to say, okay, great. Those are all really good things. We can do them all. Let's agree what order we're going to do them in so that we can focus on number one. And when we finish number one, we can focus on number two, and then so on down the list. One team I've worked with recently used to hear me say a lot, hey, that's great, but it's number 11 on our top 10 list. Which was, my way of saying these are fantastic ideas, but if they distract us from our priorities, we're just not going to be successful. And when I look back at my own career, Dan, anytime I've been disappointed with a performance review or something I was able to get done in a particular period of time, every time it didn't go as I expected. When I look back, I had listed too many goals and objectives.
Yep.
And when I think about the times I've been most successful and advanced in my career or got great things done in a business, it's when there's been just a very, very small number of goals and objectives. And yet they were big and significant goals, but there was a few of them, so I was able to concentrate and focus. And I think it's so important to recognize that you have to be able to do a few things well rather than doing a bunch of stuff in a mediocre fashion. And maybe to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier in customer focus, no customer wants to buy a bunch of stuff that's mediocre. Customers would be far more satisfied with things that do just maybe one or two things or a few number of things, but do them incredibly well. And I bringing simplicity to a product and really understanding what a customer wants to do, and then bringing them only that, and hiding away all of the distracting stuff, all the complex stuff. I see founders who are trying to pitch to venture capitalists and others, and they want to say about all of the fantastic things that their product's going to do or their company is going to do or this new technology is going to do. people get lost in that, as do customers. You have to be able to say, here is the one or two, here are the few things we're going to do incredibly well. It's so liberating to make that decision, because once you've decided what not to do, you can now really throw all of your time and attention into the few things that you are going to do well.
Right, right. And really the focus around excellence and quality over quantity, right? Which is the cliche, but it's so true in terms of ultimately what you're delivering and the benefits of that greater focus. And I'm curious, because you have led from a global perspective, you've lived in different locales around the world. Do you think serving a global customer base adds complexity in trying to go through and make those decisions? Or what are your thoughts on how to best approach it when you have very diverse cultural or market considerations too that feed into that prioritization?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to approach it. The first is to make sure that you're at a stage in your business or with your product where you actually should be going after a global market. Sometimes it can be important to first decide where you're going to focus, maybe geographically, or what segment you're going to focus on, or what need you're going to fill, and do a great job of addressing that before moving out to other areas. Now, certainly in business, you can always be opportunistic, and if somebody from halfway around the world has heard about your product and calls up and wants to talk about it, well, that's fantastic, and you should always take those phone calls from customers. But that's different from deciding, hey, I'm not even really successful, say here in North America, but I'm definitely going to go tap the market in Asia now. I think wherever you are in the world, be successful in your local market first. If you can't be successful in your local market, you're certainly not going to be successful in a global market. And whether it's local or expanding globally, first of all, you're just realizing that you have to continue to meet customer needs. Everyone customers are human. They have needs that may be met. Those might be different in different markets. And you certainly have to have approach that. You can't assume, of course, that the things you might know, that perhaps the stereotypes you may have learned about a particular market or a culture. All automotive manufacturers do things this way. All companies in Korea do things this way. All of the mining operations in South America run this way. Those are probably not true. They might be helpful heuristics to start to get you focused in the right direction. But back to what we said earlier about being customer focused, you have to be able to be empathetic. You have to really seek to understand the customer and bring that out. And then, I go back to something that David Kelly, the founder of IDEO, said, that enlightened trial and error outperforms the planning of flawless execution. And so you can't just sort of pick up your product today and say, hey, we're going to go serve a new market with the same product, and we're just going to do our marketing in a little different way, or whatever the case may be. There may be some real things in the product that have to be different, and you just have to think about that as another customer segment you're going after. So whether it's a different geography or a different industry, in either case, you need to understand that target customer as well as you understood your first customer.
That's a great point. And we're talking about this more disciplined approach and prioritization. What do you feel the role of measurement and analytics plays in all of that?
I think, like having process, you should have just enough measurement and analytics. Sometimes people can be a slave to the data, and look at things and forget that there is a set of customers, or there is a business behind the numbers. And so, yes, certainly if you've brought a product to market, you think you're doing all the right things and nobody's buying it, that's an important measurement to have, and tells you might have something wrong either with the product or the way you're bringing it to market, the way you're presenting it, or whatever the case is. And I think it's good to have goals that you can actually measure. I've often said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that doesn't mean you should overdo things by having a metric for everything. But if you don't fundamentally understand what some of the the things that will drive particular measurements, whether that's you can start with revenue. That can just start even with units sold. If you're in a startup and you're pre-revenue and you just want to get experience from users, maybe it's the number of active users, the number of engaged users. So it is very important to establish metrics that fit the stage of your business. And if you're a large enough business, I certainly remember getting to a point at Microsoft where you could have a great idea for a new product, but if it wasn't quickly going to be $100 million and then $1 billion business, it probably wasn't something that Microsoft could take on at that point in time. So knowing what the metrics inside your organization are too helps you bring an idea forward, bring a product forward, bring a new business direction forward in a way that makes sense. People are very fond of dashboards and numbers and measurements. I would say get it down to the smallest number of metrics possible that really give you insight into what's happening in your business or with your product or with your customers. And maybe that's units, maybe that's dollars in revenue, maybe it's engaged users, whatever those numbers happen to be for your particular business, but get them down to a few numbers. And one way to deal with this, again, saying no to having too many numbers, is to say, okay, if this number goes up or down, what will I do differently in the business because of that? And is there another number that, one of the other things I've already decided on that's going to give me that same signal or that same information? If so, I don't need this extra number. We can throw it out. So you can get down to the few metrics that are going to be most important in your particular business.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear you say that, this idea of winnowing down to the most important metrics, because I have seen, John, so often teams get literally overwhelmed that they're out in pursuit of pulling together anything that is quantifiable that's even possible out there, and then they just get burdened, and it almost becomes a paralysis, right, around just having sifting through all of this. And that can be another impediment, right, to making that decision. You can just get bogged down in just too much stuff to try to sort through and question, re-question. So yeah, the kind of that blockage of getting to a decision sometimes is just by the sheer weight of the data.
Yeah, and another thing to think about is really the cost of getting that data. I've seen situations where companies had sales organizations and they tasked their sellers with collecting all sorts of information and filling out all sorts of reports, and this would get assembled and people would look at dashboards, and none of it really mattered. And at the end of the day, the cost to the organization. I remember being in a business review with an executive once and said, I know you asked us to fill out this page with all of these numbers and all of these metrics, but in fairness to you, I want you to understand that none of these are the metrics we use to manage the business in our local geography. So either I'm managing my business the wrong way and you should school me on how to do a better job and use these metrics, or maybe because of the success we're having, the metrics you're talking about here aren't really all that important. But either way, we have a disconnect that we should talk about. I think that raised a few eyebrows around the room when I said that, but I think it's incredibly important today as it was back then.
Well, you and I will continue the global movement to continue to try to streamline the amount of data. We're going to keep going on that. And as we start winding down our conversation, John, I'm going to ask you something I've asked several other guests on the podcast, and that is, we're obviously in the midst of a global pandemic with continued uncertainty. There's a lot of business disruption that we're all facing. But through all of that, what still makes you optimistic when you think about the future?
First of all, Dan, I think it's great that you presume that I'm optimistic, and certainly I am. So that's good. Hopefully, that's come across. You and I have known each other for some time. It goes back to something I talked about almost at the top of our conversation here, which is that I see myself as a problem solver. I think humans are problem solvers, and so and we're not alone in the universe, right? So there's a reason we're here. We have something worth doing, and so we can apply ourselves to that. If we ever say, "Oh my goodness, there's nothing to be done," I think the world will be in a terrible place. We can say, "This is a very difficult circumstance. It's hard to know prudentially what's the right thing to do here, but let's keep working and driving at this." And again, that notion of, sometimes it's just trial and error. Even in dealing with the pandemic, at first we weren't sure how it was spread. We thought, will it be helpful to wear masks? We don't know. Yes, it looks like it is helpful to wear masks. So, we learn things, we solve problems by trial and error. And because we have that God-given ability to do that as human beings, that gives me reason to be very hopeful and optimistic about the future, because we will find a vaccine. We will be able to distribute it and deploy it. We will maybe go about our daily lives in very different ways, going forward. But this is certainly not the first pandemic in human history. This is not the first transition to how things work in the culture and in business. And so, I think because of the nature of human beings, we're problem solvers, and that gives us reason for optimism.
Yeah, that's definitely an encouraging outlook. And the other thing we've pointed out a few times in these various podcast conversations is what history has shown us is some of the greatest innovations and advancements in human history have occurred during times of greatest disruption, right? And stress. So if that's a bellwether too, is that by coming together through times like we're facing now, that we'll continue to problem solve in new and different ways, things we maybe can't even imagine at this point, but yet the future has all that potential. So, John, thanks again for joining and sharing your perspectives on leadership, your perspectives on how to balance customer needs with capabilities in organizations, and the need to prioritize and make difficult but important decisions for success moving forward. Thanks again.
Yeah, you're quite welcome, Dan. It's really been my pleasure. I've enjoyed our conversation.
And a reminder to our audience that feedback is really important. If you like this podcast, please go out, rate, and review. You can do that very easily, certainly through Apple Podcasts. Really appreciate it. Encourage you to provide the feedback. And also, as always, make sure to visit marketimpactnow.com for the latest in business leadership perspectives. So long until next time.